Okay, brilliant. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next London Reactor Meetup group. So if you're new here, the London Reactor is a community space for third-party community groups and first-party community events like this one. So it's run by Microsoft, so myself, Ravneet, and a few others here at the Reactor. And what we do is we aim to provide an environment for everybody to skill up and learn. So we're really lucky today. We've got two lovely talks, one from Tarun and one from Johan. Unfortunately, Tarun couldn't be here today, but he is joining virtually. So hello to everybody online as well. He's going to pop in and we're going to get him to introduce his session in a moment. Before that, I would just like to say a quick word about code of conduct. Let that one on there. And then you sign out. There we go. Lovely. Thank you. So if you can just take a quick second to have a read of this one. So the main gist of it is, please be kind, please be respectful, ask questions. If you're online, please throw your questions into the chat. That'd be really appreciated. We have got facilities and people here to help answer them for you as well. And if you're in person, if you have a question, wait for me to run around with the microphone so that everybody online can also hear you. And yeah, just be happy and respectful to everybody. Okay, so with our first talk, we have got Tarun. So I'm going to bring you up onto the stream. So hopefully, here we go. So add you up there. And let's put us side by side. Hopefully you can sort of see. Say hello, Tarun.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can't actually see you. Remove this one. So I bear with technical difficulties. It's all from a StreamYard and two screens.
Right, I can see the screen now, so hopefully I'll be popping up on the screen and then I can sort of introduce the talk and myself as well.
So if you talk, everyone can hear you. We just can't see you.
Okay, well, that's less important. What's important is that everyone can hear me. So hi, everyone. My name is Tarun. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today, although all the plans were laid out, but best laid out plans don't always realize and materialize. So that's been the case today. The talk that I am presenting today, which will be played back after I've introduced it, is about making containerization the first class candidate that it should be within the developer workflow. And with Azure Container Apps and GitHub, and Visual Studio Code, that experience for the developer has really been uplifted from being very complex to being simplified, right? So you don't have to focus on writing boilerplate commands to sort of get containers set up. And instead you can focus on the important bit, which is the business logic that will be running within your container. So, I've been around the block for more than 15, 20 years now. And DevOps, when it started, was the sysadmins trying to code or coders trying to do sysadmin work. And somewhere we came in the middle to sort of make DevOps more developer focused rather than more administration focused. And now I find that we've come into the era of SRE, where it's less about just automating a process, but making it repeatable to the extent where no hands and no intervention is required as such, right? And containerization plays a really big role in that. Now, containerization has existed for a number of years, and we've seen various incarnations of that. Now, if any of you in the audience have run a Kubernetes cluster in production, you'd know, right? It's almost like having to research for commands, try them out, and hope that when you run them on the live cluster, they just work and don't disrupt, right? It's a constant learning environment. The platform itself is also evolving very quickly, which makes it really complex. But with Azure now offering Kubernetes as a managed service in AKS, but also now offering you a PaaS, a serverless version of Kubernetes, which is what Azure Container Apps is, it's really easy to consume, right? So there's no excuse not to run your workloads in containers. And the billing is very gracious as well, right? You only pay by the second you consume. Therefore, if your workloads are dormant and not being used, really you have no cost of running the workloads. From a scalability perspective, it's really attractive, right? You could go from not running any workload to rapidly scaling your app through consumption. And what's really good in Azure Container Apps as well is that it contains KIDA built in, right? So what that does is you could start to plug in and say, this is what my traffic input pattern is going to be, and therefore I want to link the scalability of my container apps in line with that. So Azure Container Apps, can't emphasize enough. It's really changing the game. If you haven't yet, please go take a look at it. The talk I'm doing today is very much the developer workflow of you as a developer starting off a project, creating a minimal API which has some REST calls. How would you take something like this, use the tooling that's available in GitHub to your advantage to set up workflows that would automate the process of building that API into a container for you and publishing that into a container registry. In the demo, I'm using the good old Azure container registry, but again, you could point this at Docker Hub. You could even use the container registry available within GitHub now, should you choose to. And then from there, right, how do you publish this into container apps? And towards the end of the demo, you'll also see how easy it is now with container apps to do A/B testing. Whereas a developer, you could publish one container app with one version of the app, then publish another version of the app and say, well, actually, I now want the traffic split 50-50 between these two versions of the app. And in the background, container app does all the heavy lifting of routing the traffic, making sure that the traffic is being distributed. So, we've come a long way in the tech, and I hope, after you've seen the demo, you'd go off and give Azure Container Apps a real kick and, report back your findings on how this product can even be improved further. So I'll take a pause here, Liam, and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Tarun. Yeah, that's a brilliant introduction. I mean, for those of you who don't know, this is the end. Well, September, we ran Serverless September, which I wanted to put together this meetup this week so that we can just run through some of the best parts of Serverless themselves. So whilst we're just getting set up, we're going to share Tarun's video now. So if we can play this one in full screen and we can add it over to StreamYard. Any questions so far while we're getting this quickly set up? No, silence, I like it. This is always the beauty of hybrid events. I love it. Perfect. Right, we're going to play this one now. So hopefully you can all hear this on the stream remotely. And if we have any questions at the end, Tarun, I will swing around with a microphone.
Perfect. Thank you. Application development with GitHub. More and more developers are building cloud-native solutions with lean microservices architecture. Developer productivity and developer velocity are paramount. GitHub has only one ambition: to make every developer more productive. Now, in this demo-only session today, we're going to see how Visual Studio Code, GitHub, and Azure Container Apps come together to make building cloud-native solutions a breeze. We're going to look at a typical developer workflow, which begins from Visual Studio Code, using ASP.NET Core Web APIs, building and deploying locally into Docker, and how seamless it is using the right extensions to publish that solution into Azure Container Registry, which natively integrates into Azure Container Apps, where you could be running and scaling your containers to cloud scale. And how, when you bring in GitHub, it offers these little integrations into your everyday activities, adding small bits of productivity, which all adds up. And we'll also look at how Container Apps enables continuous deployment by leveraging actions, which is a feature offered by GitHub. And all of that means you could be in the context of the code and still have all the bells and whistles of CI, CD, security baked into your everyday developer workflows. Right, my name is Tarun. I'm a Microsoft MVP and head of application transformation for Avanade across UK and Ireland. I'm obsessed with high quality working software, cloud native engineering, and human-centric design. I run a YouTube channel called Azure Devops TV, and I often tweet on Aurora_Tarun. Stay in touch and enjoy the rest of the session. Let's start off by changing into the repo directory. Over here, I'm going to make a new directory and let's call it weather01. Change directory into weather01. Yeah, I've already installed .NET on my machine. You could run the .NET list SDK command to see the versions that are not installed already. Equally, you could install .NET if you don't have it installed. Let's create a new web API with minimal API configuration. I'm going to call it Weather API. And as I trigger that command in the background, it's just using the standard ASP.NET Core Web API template to create the project. Let's change directory into that project. And what we can do is with Visual Studio Code installed on the machine, we could open Visual Studio Code in the context of this new project that we've created. Here we go. We can see the files. Now, the first thing you'll see here is I'm in Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to go into the extension section and look for GitHub Copilot. It's an amazing, amazing extension that makes you double the smart developer you are, because it gives you the recommendations of useful code snippets in the context of the code that you're in, using AI from ingestion of all the public repos that are out there. So I'm going to create a weather forecast CS file. And as you see, within the context of this project, all I'm trying to create is a file with a bunch of properties. And typing my way through it already recognizes the intention and gives me a recommendation with all the right properties. So I'm just going to tab into it, and that should be good enough. Okay, let's save that. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to compile this project, right? I want to make sure that it's building locally on my machine with the changes as I've done. And with running this project, let's quickly look at the response in the browser. I can see I've got the web API up. I can see it's responding. I can see all the properties that I keyed in are showing up there as well. Let's change that to weather forecast, so we can see the JSON response coming back from the API as well. And this is sort of semi-hard coded in the way that calculations are done dynamically. So every time you trigger the API, it's recalculating and serving back the response as well. Okay, well, let's initialize a new Git repository in the context of this folder. I could do that by just running the git init command. And as you see, the moment I initialize, it recognizes there are 45 uncommitted files. Now, the catch here is we don't have a Git Ignore file. There's this really cool extension for Git Ignore by Code Zombie. I've already installed on my machine. Now, the moment I press F1 and I type Git Ignore, it gives me the option of adding a Git Ignore file. And I can choose from a catalog of pre-existing options. So I've selected Visual Studio Code. And if I use the command again, I have the option of appending to the exact file or overriding the file as well. This is kind of useful, right? If you want to maintain one Git Ignore file with different things in it. You see now I've only got 9 pending files because the Git Ignore ignores a large chunk of the files that are not necessary and that don't need to be committed. Okay, well, to begin with, I'm going to stage my Git Ignore file. And then with that done, I'm going to commit all the other files into my local Git repo. Now, remember, this is still my local Git repo. I don't have a GitHub repository, but the amazing integration with between GitHub and Visual Studio, I just press publish branch, and I have the option of creating a public or a private GitHub repository. So as you can see at the bottom right, the local repository is being published to GitHub, and I can open up the repository right from here. Okay, well, let's open it. And as you can see, the repository is opened. I can see all my commits, and I have the option of adding a README file now. Just for the sake of demo, I'm going to create a README file. I mean, this is a minimalistic web API. Okay, well, let's just add that to the README file and commit the changes. And you'll see my Visual Studio is configured to also fetch the files as well for any changes that may be happening on GitHub on the repository as well. And those changes will show up with the new file showing up in my Visual Studio Code already. There you go. Okay, so with that, we've got the code compiling, the code building, the repository published upstream. Now, the next extension I want to show you is the Docker extension. The Docker extension makes using Docker commands a breeze right from Visual Studio Code. And really, if you're a developer in the modern era, you don't want to be having to remember commands, right? You just want to be more productive by being able to use extensions that understand your intent. Now, with the Docker command installed, I can see all the containers, all the images, any registries I have connected within my local space here. And I've connected up to Azure already. Just by pressing F1, I could give a command here to generate a Docker file for me. It basically looks at my project settings and then gives me the option to select from a catalog what type of Docker files do I want to create. I'm going to use the .NET ASP.NET Core because I'm just using an ASP.NET Core Minimo API. I could choose between a Linux or a Windows machine. In my Docker file, I'm going to go with Linux here. Gives me the option to choose if I want to export a port for traffic ingress. I've selected that, and whether I want to generate a Docker Compose file as well. Now, back in the day, yeah, you would have had to write these files yourselves, even sometimes without IntelliSense support, but you get a fully fledged Docker file created for you with best practices. As you can see, it creates a temporary user, which has disabled password settings, and it uses that to copy the files from your local into that app folder, and then does the whole multi-stage container build. So it only has the compile files and doesn't retain the source code in there as such. So that's fantastic, right? Really makes it easy to create Docker files. There you go, right? You have your Docker Compose file as well. It creates your Docker Ignore file as well. Now, going back into the extension, I have the option of just giving a command here to build the image, right? Rather than having to go on command line and write Docker build -t da 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 da. I don't need to remember that. I could just F1 and select from here to build a container. Now you can see behind the scenes is actually just running the commands as you would have done back in the day. And it's just following the steps listed out in the Docker file. It's building the container, it's downloading the layers, it's created the user, it's moving the files across, and it's just copying the published files across into the folder. Now, with the image build, you should be able to see in Docker image section here, the newly built image. And you have the option right from here to right click and publish this image to a registry of your choice. Now I'm going to publish this into Microsoft Azure, but if you were using Docker Hub or GitHub packages, then you could do the publication to them right from here as well. And it's very context aware, right? The integration is amazing because not only can I publish to Azure, but I can actually select the specific registry, and I have the option of choosing the tag that I want to specify on this specific image being published as well. Okay, so it's just trying to connect behind the scenes into my registry, and it's completed the publish. So let's expand the registry. I can see my Azure subscription. I can see the specific registry, and that's the image that we've just published. Great. Well, it doesn't have to stop here. You could literally right-click the image that you've just built, and you have the option of running it and running it in interactive mode. And the benefit of running this in the interactive mode is, any logging that's coming out, you'll start to see within the terminal right away. And you could basically run it in debug mode if you wanted to. So let's follow that link. We can see that the API is showing up. So that's good, right? We've gone from publishing the Git repository to building the Docker container locally to publishing it into the registry manually to being able to run the container locally on our machine. And the integration is pretty amazing because I can look at the mounted device and open up the files directly from there in the context of Visual Studio Code as well. Back in the day, it would have taken lots of commands to get here, but the integration makes this experience pretty seamless. Next up, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new resource group within Azure. And the reason for doing that is we want to provision an Azure container apps instance. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new resource group in UK South. That's the region closest to where I am at the moment. And next, we're going to create a container app. Now, the container app is basically created, but before that, you need to create a hosting environment for it. And so we're going to create a container app hosting environment. If you worked with Azure App Services or Azure Functions, the construct of an app service plan would be very familiar to you, which is in essence what's happening here in the background. Okay, so with that bit created, let's move into Azure Portal. Let's tab into Azure Portal. You can see that It's created the hosting plan there for app services, app service plan. And it's also created for me a workspace for log analytics. And I'm now going to create a container app. I'm just going to choose the defaults here, give it a name. Now, instead of choosing the defaults for the image, I'm going to pick the image that we've just published ourselves. Now, we've published it to Azure, but had we published it into Docker Hub, we could have selected it from Docker Hub as well by keying in our credentials. So the image we published was Weather API 01. And what I want to do is I want to publish the latest version of that into the container app. And you have the option of overriding the command or selecting what CPU and memory you want to specify. One thing that's really important is to this endpoint, I want to specify an HTTP ingress so I can actually access the API externally as well. But if I was running this in production, rather than expose the API from the container app, I would only expose it internally and hook it up with maybe an Azure front door. There you go. It's provisioned, and we can directly access the API from there as well. Now, what's really cool is once you have the container app provisioned, you can set up continuous deployment right from within Azure Container Apps. And so I've linked my GitHub account, and I'm now selecting the registry where I want GitHub to publish the images every time I do a new commit to my GitHub repository. And you see the integration is really straightforward. All the credentials are stored here, right? So no password needed to be keyed in and no keys needed to be extracted. And the moment that happens, you see in my GitHub repo, a new workflow gets created. And this workflow actually has the YAML definition of what in essence would happen in the background. A new job would be spun up, which has two stages, a build stage and a deploy stage. And the build stage is basically just building the container up. And then the deploy stage is seeding some credentials in GitHub for my Azure account to publish the image that's built into the container instance. Now let's make a code change here. And after making that code change, we're going to commit our changes to the Git repo. Now, because I have continuous deployment set up, if I navigate into actions, I'd see a new build gets triggered in the workflow, a new job gets triggered. And it's already executed the build stage of it. Now it's executing the deploy stage of it. And deployment is basically taking the container and publishing it into the container app. There we go. The new container has been published. And to prove it, let me show you all the inactive revisions. What's really cool now is I can split the traffic coming in my container app against two separate versions of the revisions. And that means if I wanted to do some A/B testing between my new changes and my previous changes, then it makes it so seamless to be able to do that. Historically, I would have had to set up all sorts of things like app gateways and set up traffic splitting, but with container apps, all of that functionality is offered pretty much out of the box. So as we've seen here, container apps is fantastic. The integration from container apps into GitHub is fantastic because it lets you pretty much set up continuous deployment in a matter of clicks. And then the integration back into Visual Studio Code, your #1 open source IDE is stunning as well. So hopefully you see in today's world, creating modern apps in lean architectures using cloud native services is not difficult, doesn't have to be difficult. And I hope you enjoyed the session, and thank you for listening into the video.
Thank you very much for that, Tarun. I just want to say a massive thank you for putting that together, because you managed to spin up an entire pipeline in a 15-minute demonstration. Now, I have a quick question. Before you go to the real, I have a quick question. How long did that actually take you to put together? Because as a developer, we always do like the golden path of this, and I always love to give a realistic expectation. So how long did that take you? Okay, I think we might have lost him on the stream. He's on mute. No, I think we've lost him. I'll tell you what we'll do, though. We do have pizzas coming shortly. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. So we have got some dinner for you. Second to that, after the pizza, we have got Johan's talk. We're going to see if Tarun comes back. So if you're there, Tarun, give us a wave, give us a shout, let us know. Otherwise, a massive thank you. And I hope you all enjoyed that demonstration. So in fact, does anybody here actually have any questions for him? Just while we're thinking. God, you're a quiet bunch tonight. I like it. Yep. For the marketplace for Docker, nope, that is a free extension. I believe that's a good point, actually. So I believe one of the only extensions that he used, which you may have to pay for, which is probably not included, is GitHub Copilot. I think you have to now pay for that one. The free subscription or the free trial ran out about a month or two ago. But nonetheless, if you are in an education pack, if there's other ways that you can get that, then it's certainly worth it. It really does make a difference between developing locally and actually having a second hand to sort of pair program with. It's a pretty cool tool, as you saw. So no, in answer to your question, Docker extension is completely free. Yeah, most of that was. Tarun, we have you back.
Right, sorry, I missed the question.
No worries. I had one question for you, so we're just going to put you up on the screen. I asked, how long did that really take you to create? So you managed to squeeze in a whole lot in a 15-minute video there. So I always like to give real expectations to people as to how long it really took you to create that entire pipeline. Was that sort of like an hour?
An hour, if I was taking it easy, it would have taken 45 minutes. I mean, genuinely, I recorded the video by pressing record and I stopped on the other side. I looked at it, it was 25 minutes. And then I trimmed the bits of the weight, right? So it was really easy. You see, when you create an API using the command line, right away you can see it's giving you the minimal API with all the REST configuration embedded in it. When you install the Docker extension, in 2 clicks you have a Docker file, and unless you select the wrong configuration and then have to troubleshoot later, it's plug and play, right? It's ready to go. And then after publishing it, when you say I want to do setup continuous deployment, it actually commits the YAML into GitHub for you, right? Because you've plugged in your token in there from your authorization. So like the whole process is so streamlined and seamless that it doesn't generally take more than 30 minutes to set up end to end. What's great now is once you have this set up, you could just start layering your business logic and run this pipeline constantly to see the results and reap the benefits of having all of this automated end to end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Does anybody in the room have any questions? Yes, we have a question at the back.
You showed being able to change the traffic profile. And I was wondering, can you support like a canary style deployment where it automatically goes from like 1% all the way through to 100% and switching between those two without actual human intervention as well?
That's possible. That is possible. So when we deploy using the Azure YAML pipeline, the GitHub workflow there, which is embedded in the pipeline, it uses the default configuration that you're superseding the last deployment with the current deployment. But there's some configuration available in the form of switches where you could specify the deployment to be in a style where it's following a reroute of the traffic by a percentage, right? So over time, you could say, I want to deploy this with 50% or 60% or 70% of the traffic being now routed to the new deployment. So yes, in a way, it would support your use case natively. I also think if you were doing this for production, you would more likely have a Azure front door deployed on top of your container apps, and you would manage the configuration of front door to do the traffic routing across the 2 canaries that you've set up. So I think from a dev workflow perspective, it provides the configuration to seamlessly, do the traffic routing, but more for the production scenarios where you would have front door, it would allow you to do the customization there as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I actually have one more question. How do you find the maintenance of using app services? So being a serverless service is all about scaling up and down ad hoc, right? And it is moving to within like a 0 instance state. How do you find startups? Do you find any cold starts? Is there any lag in that? You're scaling, what's your limits? Can you just explain a little bit more on that, please?
That's a fantastic question, Liam. And anyone who's worked with Azure Functions would know, right? You almost have 2 configurations where you pay less and you pay the cost of a cold start, where the first request will really warm up the engine, and there's some seconds of a delay, but once it's ramped up, every subsequent request would just be served immediately. And similar situation with container apps, because under the hood, container apps are still running on app service environment, right? So the underlying technology that's powering it still uses the same construct. So you have 2 options there as well, right? You could in essence, choose a way of having a cold start, therefore paying even less, or in a way take up paying slightly more, but have, you know, like a 0.05% CPU utilization throughout on your app service instance, which guarantees, right, that your instance is always up and available to respond to the first request when it's issued.
Hold on 1 second. We just got some feedback in the room. We fixed it. Sorry, continue.
Okay, so I was saying, if you worked with Azure Functions, right, you would see that you have essentially two pricing models. One where you pay less and you have, you know, the app only comes up when you have the first request issued. And in that situation, right, you have to pay the price of the cold start, where the first request takes slightly longer to respond, but then it turns on the engine. Therefore, the next request is pretty much immediate. With Azure Container Apps, the underlying construct of app service environment is still the same, right? Your container apps are running on app services environment. So you again have two similar models. You could pay less and really have no traffic on your Azure Container App, therefore have a cold start, or you could opt for a different model where app service environment will run your container for 0.005% CPU constantly, therefore keeping it warm. And that means when the first request comes, it's already up and available, and there's really no cold start in play here. And I did actually a test. I found a very useful blog about this as well. The overall monthly cost of running an Azure Container App with the warm, like a 0.05% CPU utilization, worked out to be about £3 for the entire month. For me, that's, you know, not a lot of cost when especially you want to avoid a cold start. So it supports that model. You could have this deployed in a way where you won't have a cold start, and the actual cost of doing it is not very high as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So it's kind of like quite a resource lean and cost-effective way of running serverless containers. Absolutely lovely. Any more questions from the room? We do have one over here.
Yeah, hello, thank you. So this is very nice in Visual Studio Code, but when you have a big project, there is an expectation of have these tools in Visual Studio, like these quick run Docker files and all of that, so you don't need to keep switching between developing and running these kind of quick, nice things. So there is any expectation of have, for example, these extensions in Visual Studio?
Yeah, I mean, you're raising a very good question there, right? Because a lot of the developers are developing in Visual Studio as they are in IntelliJ or in Rider, or, you know, in other IDEs as well. And from what I can tell, a lot of the, you know, 70–80% of the extensions I've shown, including, you know, the Docker extension, the Git Ignore extension, as well as the GitHub Copilot, are now starting to show up in other IDs, including Visual Studio. I find, because the innovation is happening first in the open source, these extensions get first issued for Visual Studio Code and then get ported over to the other IDEs in due course. So I don't have a perfect answer for you, right? Like, it'd be great if everyone was releasing extensions for every IDE out there, but you know, they gradually arrive. But at the moment, right, to answer your question, I think all except one extension is available within Visual Studio today, right? So you could be doing your, you know, you could have the same flow going on from Visual Studio without having to change context.
Amazing. Thank you, Tarun. I think with this, we're going to break because the pizza has just arrived. You are solely missed here. So thank you for taking part virtually. We really do appreciate it. And thank you for putting together such a great session and a demonstration for us all. It's really insightful to see how we can use these services and just how quickly you can spin up such a pretty wicked application from a little bit of know-how and a little bit of time, but certainly worth it. So thank you ever so much for joining, Tarun. And
thank you, Liam. You've been a great host. I'm dearly going to miss the pizza. I hope everyone has a great time out there.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the pizza has actually just arrived, so we will break here, have some pizza, and then we will reconvene for Johan's talk on application insights and how to monitor your serverless applications in Azure, which would be quite a fun one because this is something which I don't see all too often. Everybody likes to throw a lot of serverless and services and functions, but nobody ever really likes to monitor them. And certainly when running in production, it is super, super important. So I can't wait to listen to this one. So yes, we'll reconvene in about half an hour-ish. So give you some time to eat some pizza and network with one another. If you have any questions, come and grab me and come give a chat. You were muted.
No,
There we go.
We were on mute.
No, you're on mute. Very fitting, that t-shirt. Love it. Hello to you online if you're still there. Welcome. We are ready for the next session. So make yourself comfortable and right, we'll get going. So those of you who don't know, Microsoft Ignite is happening next week. Now, Microsoft Ignite is one of our biggest global flagship conferences, and we are running a global spotlight in Manchester in the UK. There's 6 running around the world, and of course, we have got the main event in Seattle. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to hand it over to Adam now, who's going to run us through just a couple of slides. I think you've got about 5 minutes worth, I think. Yeah, give your best shot.
Hi, I'm all about brevity. Hi everyone, my name is Adam Jackson. I am the Dev Community Lead for Microsoft UK. I just thought I'd tell you a bit about Ignite and some of the other things coming up. So does anyone know what Microsoft Ignite is, first of all? No one. Okay, so Microsoft Ignite is actually Microsoft's biggest technical event of the year. Some of you may be familiar with Microsoft Build, which happened in the May timeframe. That is a developer event. Microsoft Ignite is a technical event. So it's developers, IT professionals, data scientists, managers, all sorts of different people. But it's all about tech, and it's about how people can actually use Microsoft innovations in the real world. Now, Microsoft Ignite's been going for many years. Some people will remember it used to be in places like Orlando, but we also had UK versions that happened later in the year. This year, we're doing something a bit different. So the global event is happening from the 12th to the 14th of October. That's next Wednesday to Friday. And it's going to be a global event. So there's going to be something coming from Seattle. But we're also going to be doing something from the UK as well. And this page here is Spotlight on the UK. And instead of doing it in London, we're actually going to do the event from Manchester to put a bit more geographical diversity in. But fear not, the whole event is going to be online. We're expecting, hopefully, tens of thousands of you joining us just in the UK and hundreds of thousands globally. One of my jobs is to put the UK show together. So we're going to have myself and Liam and many other people coming live, and also some wonderful keynotes and guests. I can't tell you all of the names of the guests, but there are some reasonably big names that are going to be represented at this event. So we hope that you will sign up for that event. You can, by the way, this URL, aka.ms/tech resources, will take you to a page with everything on. If I just change the slide. One of the other things that we do at Microsoft Ignite is a Cloud Skills Challenge. Cloud Skills Challenge is a guided sort of learning experience where you can compete against your peers to be the best in a particular Microsoft topic. Now, for Microsoft Ignite, we do something special. We do a free exam voucher. And if you've done Microsoft certifications already, you'll know about this, but Microsoft certs are a really great way of finding a new job, getting a promotion, asking for a pay rise, getting credibility with your manager and also with customers that you might work with as well if you're customer facing. So if you complete a Cloud Skills Challenge and you've got about 4 weeks to do it after Ignite starts, then you'll actually get an exam voucher in your account, which you can use to redeem against a great array of different certs. And there's everything from sort of beginners, Azure fundamentals, all the way through to DevOps expert, for example, and more. We have a website. So we got told that people were looking for developer resources, tech resources in one place. So we've put together a site called Microsoft UK Developers. Actually has stuff for IT pros as well, but mainly developers. And we've got content for people that are just starting out, that are looking to change, or for people that are advanced and they're looking for whether that's learning material, documentation, or events just like this. So again, follow the URL. It'll all take you to the same place. You can see some things on there, events and different links. And we've also got this wonderful map which shows tech communities across the UK. I think you can see there's 14 meetups and user groups listed for London, many of them hosted right here. Actually, don't think the Reactor Meetup's on there, so we need to add that. That's going to go in the next release. Now, I'm going to come back to this actually, so just bear with me. Finally, don't forget the Reactor website has relaunched. Yes, so actually tonight's event is listed on there. If I go to the next slide, you can see it in the top left, London Reactor Meetup Serverless. But you can find out plenty of other events, whether they're online or in person, on the Reactor London website, ak.ms/Reactor London. And finally, I was just going to bring that QR code up again. That is our tech resources site. Hope you will check it out, give it a scan, and don't forget to enter the Cloud Skills Challenge. You've got till about the middle of November to complete it. Cool.
Just want to double check, Adam, are those cloud skill challenges live, or do they go live on the 12th?
I think they go live on the 12th.
Yep, so they go live on the 12th.
Register.
Yep, so make sure you register for those ones. They're going to be super good. Who here knows what Cloud Skill Challenge is? Kind of. Okay, so who's heard of Microsoft Learn? Okay, so a couple hands. All right, so Microsoft Learn is a platform for learning materials. So lots of little modules that sort of can help you get into Azure, or maybe agile development or project management, those sort of learning paths. It's gamification. You kind of XP for learning resources that you complete. And a Cloud Skill Challenge is essentially just an accumulation or a collection of learn modules for you to complete. And at the end, you obviously get a free certification for this one, but otherwise little trophies and a little yay, thumbs up, well done. So with this, I'm actually going to now hand over to Johan, who has got a wonderful talk all around application insights and how you monitor your serverless applications in Azure. So I'm going to switch this microphone off, you turn your one on, and we should hopefully do
Yes.
Sorry?
Hello.
Is StreamYard? No, StreamYard is not owned by Microsoft. Unfortunately, that's Teams.
I think we've got audio back.
Right, we have audio back.
Nice.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Here we go.
Cool. All right. Brilliant. Thank you. Let me actually just get the right screen up on there. Do I need to do anything to share it, by the way, to the... Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, that's what I figured. Cool. Present, I'm guessing. Present screen. Okay. All right. Specific window. We'll get there. We'll get there. All right. Awesome. Hopefully everybody can see that and hear me loud and clear. So, hi everyone. My name is Johan. I am a cloud solution architect with Microsoft, focusing on the application innovation side. And today I'm going to be talking to you about App Insights, which is the fun and exciting world of monitoring your serverless applications once they've been deployed. This will be kind of a little bit like what Tarun did. No slides, kind of live demo. We'll go through it, and feel free to ask questions at the end if you have any, which hopefully you do. A little bit of context about this, and kind of about why we're bringing this into the serverless is oftentimes, kind of as Liam was referring to, you've got your application deployed, you've got even your CI/CD, it's looking shiny, you're building, you're deploying, it's beautiful, but getting those live metrics and tying that back into that CI/CD, to the new build, to any of the kind of improved testing that you want to do, often gets forgotten, or in all actuality, we kind of ignore it because oftentimes it's more the kind of project managers and people like that that are asking us to keep track of it. But there are ways that it can be less of a pain and actually more fun and interactive, and kind of tying a little bit more neatly with the workflows that you're doing. So we're going to be using this website, Demo Corp, beautiful. I spent ages working on it, which has got 3 pages: your home, your about, which is a very comprehensive description page, and some fake contact information. What we're going to be doing here is, I'm not going to do a whole thing where I've introduced some sort of subtle bug in the code and we're going to debug it together. I'm literally just going to rip apart the connection string to your database, and we're going to see, based on that, the kind of error that we're going to get and how we can use application insights to kind of start narrowing down a little bit what we get from that. So very simply put, this is an app service. So not actually based on containers, and you might be thinking, is this really serverless? It's not really consumption-based. Worry not, it's auto-scaled, so technically still counts. But the idea behind what we're doing, be it function apps, be it whatever you're using, the same logic applies across the board. And in the backend, very simple Azure SQL database. The way we're currently deploying it is we're using deployment slots. So you'll notice here in the URL, there is a staging one as well as your normal one. And that is being kind of controlled through my Azure Pipelines deployment. For those of you who don't know what deployment slots, a little bit like the traffic management that was being shown by Tarun earlier for your container app. It allows you to deploy things kind of to canary or blue-green type deployments inside of your production environment and route the traffic accordingly to do all your tests, make sure that you've got everything running as you want it to for a small part of the population before you roll it out to your actual production instance. And one of the benefits of kind of using deployment slots for that gradual kind of shift into any new features or bugs that you're trying to fix is that you also don't get that problem with the cold start, because you can just swap the slots and essentially your staging becomes your production and so on and so forth as you go on. So a little bit of context on that. But that's not why we're here. We're here to look a little bit about App Insights. And so what I'm going to do is, before I review my pipeline and accept it, we're going to go into the portal. We're going to go into this lovely staging configuration, i.e. that specific app service slots that we have. And we are literally just going to delete the connection string to the database, which is something clearly people often do and face. Hopefully, my main idea behind doing this, by the way, isn't so much so that you get the full picture in terms of, oh, this is a very likely scenario, or this is something that often has happened for me in terms of what's going wrong. It's to kind of show that typically when you're removing something on the networking side, you're going to get those 404 errors, you're going to get that internal server error that doesn't give you that much information, but hopefully with all the other tools and all the other metrics that we're going to be looking at, will kind of help give us that bigger picture. So I've talked enough at you about what we're going to do. So we're just going to do it, break it. I never thought I'd actually want to break something, but echo. We're going to now approve it, which is going to deploy it to my staging slot because everything's built fine. Apparently, everything is all good. We're just going to notice that it's going to fail on some functional tests. And that's typically something where your first flag will likely be something within your application where you're starting to think, hey, it's not doing the functional test in the way it should. This is taking way longer from my deployment perspective than it usually would. It's not passing the checks. And when you actually go to the URL, decides to load, this is it trying to make that connection, but it is failing miserably. You're going to get some sort of error, which is the beauty of the live demo. Anyways, whilst this is doing that, let's head over to App Insights. Really? Okay. There you go. So you're noticing my application still works, so to speak, but I'm getting an error loading in data because, of course, that data connection has now been severed. So my first instinct after this, I've come into it, it's been broken, we all know what it is, but in theory, you wouldn't really know what's going on. Your first instinct should be to go into App Insights. Now, I've configured App Insights. You can do it either via an App Insights config file, you can do it through the portal, you can do it many ways, whatever suits you, whatever works, and you can choose and filter the types of logs you want to capture. Now, The beauty of this is that you're going to get very quickly a lot of information just from the overview screen to kind of see, okay, my response time is seemingly increasing a lot. There are some failed requests coming up over the last hour, etc. But if that's not enough, or if you're thinking about this from a, hey, let's do this in a more visual and appealing way, you can go into your application dashboard off the bat. And that gives you one of your kind of widget-based application dashboard that gives you that full view of exactly all of the different categories that you might be interested in tracking, from usage to reliability to responsiveness to things like your browsing and those habits of whatever's happening on the browser fronts. And like with any dashboard, you can filter it and add some tagging, add whatever you're looking for. And that becomes more and more powerful the more you have different components, more complexity. This is going to give you that little bit extra information and that ability to filter through it. Now, if I look at this dashboard, by the way, none of what I'm showing you has been personalized. I didn't do anything special. This is out of the box, just based straight away from App Insights being enabled. And one of the things I can already tell is that if I didn't know what the error is, I could very quickly tell that my actual architecture and my actual infrastructure seems to be operating fine. In terms of my availability is still there, the requests are seemingly still coming through, so it's not a question about that side of things. And also, if I go into the website in itself, I can see that it's still actually loading the skeleton of it. It's just the actual content that's not there. So from that perspective, I already kind of know, well, that usage side of it is fine. The infrastructure side of it is fine. But I still need to figure out what is going on from, why am I not getting the content that I want? Why is it freezing? Why is it all of that? And so this is where you can see that not only is my response time starting to increase recently from the kind of pure metric side of things, but we're starting to get some failures. And the reason I reloaded is to hopefully start picking up some of those failure requests a little bit more often. And as we're doing the testing, which should be running, okay, it's already failed. That's why we're not getting a lot of it. Usually in the background, of course, is this live demo. Didn't do it as planned, but normally that would be continuously trying to send requests and you'd be continuously getting that internal server error. So let me just run that pipeline again whilst I talk to you, and you'll start seeing more of those failed requests come in a bit more regularly. So my first instinct here is going to be starting to look at the failures, right? That's something that red flag number one, something is failing. So again, through that dashboard or through the App Insights, however you want to go about it, you can directly load into the failure. And what that shows you is what we call the transaction view of it, which is essentially a summary of all the transactions that have happened across the board that are pertaining to specific failures. If you look at the type of failures, you'll notice there's one unrelated to what we're trying to do, which is getting the API health, which is just something where I'm making a note to myself, actually, I want to do some health probing. It's not really working. I'll troubleshoot down the side. What we're really focused about is that home index, that home about, that home contact, i.e. the actual content of the website, not loading in the way that we would like it to. So I can very quickly filter and get an understanding of what actual error code is relevant to me by clicking on those being, it's quite an interactive and dynamic system. And what I can very quickly see is that it's an error 500. Surprise, surprise, internal server error doesn't give me much as a code on its own, right? It's not going to be my game-changing revelation that I get there. But I'm already getting a bit of a picture that it's not my infrastructure because it seems to be loading fine. Something realistically is quite a simple one. You've only got two components. If it's not the infrastructure, likely it's going to be that database connection. And from there, it's quite straightforward. And let's say actually I wanted to get a bit of a deeper view into it and I actually wanted to get a bit more information on that. I could click on it and it would show me all of the relevant events that have happened with that kind of same tag, and it will show me the most relevant one, which tends to be based on which one was the latest to happen and which one had the severest criticality if we're not filtering by error code, but exception type or things like that. And what I can do, and this is one of the first neat features I really want to spend a second talking about, is that as you're doing this, what you'll notice is you can integrate it with your Azure DevOps. Now, there are ways to integrate it with GitHub if you're GitHub users. It's just you have to have one or two extra steps to get that sorted. But that native integration, for those of you who are using Azure DevOps, means that if I've got my link to my project, I can very quickly, as a developer, or even as somebody who's in charge of UAT or testing or review, raise a bug or a task, depending on the type of transaction we're looking at. And that creates it straight into my IDO, puts the link to whatever the error was, gives me some sort of information on the bug and gives me that timestamp, that information that I need to either reproduce it or to actually be able to track back through the app insights. And I just assign it to myself, save. I can even bring it into my current iteration for my sprints. And all of a sudden, I have a degree of integration with that CI part. I can already start bringing them up, create my own branch, start working on it if it's a problem with the code or something's been introduced in the latest release. That's been an issue. But although that's well and good, actually, there's one piece missing, which is, well, how do I know what it's linked to? How do I know whether or not my release broke it, whether or not my commit broke it? And instead of having to go through my entire code, you can start building some correlations. Sometimes they're tricky, which we'll see here, but you can start getting a picture of, if you notice here on these specific failure elements, you'll see that there's little blue arrows. Those little blue arrows correspond to releases of that particular application insight, and you can directly click on it and open that particular pipeline or that particular essential instance run, and it will give you a quick information in terms of saying, okay, so this has failed. This now gives me a bit more information. It might be really linked to that particular release. It might be linked to that particular content. And that in itself becomes quite powerful, because just from looking at that app insights, now I've got my ticket opened, and also I'm able to very quickly say, hey, what release broke this, or what last piece of code I kind of brought into the mix has now caused this issue. In our case, clearly the code hasn't been an issue, and actually I can look at it very quickly. My latest commit here was last Thursday, and it was just changing the name of the application. So I'm kind of thinking, hold on a second, this might be a red herring. It might not necessarily be the issue, but it at least gives you that ability to check that very quickly and even roll back if you're using, Azure Devops and that to the previous stable version. And again, that becomes all the more powerful if we're talking about what Tarun was showcasing around how quickly it is to build and roll back to the different instances of your container app, right? So now we've got an idea, we've got a failure, we've got a ticket. We're still not anywhere closer on paper to actually figuring out that it's our database. We've got a bit of a kind of intuitive guess at the fact that it might be that, but we're not yet 100% sure. And this is where actually the next part is, and also just a little tiny digression here, which is I just showed you the failure data that we were looking at. You can get any sort of transaction data, as I mentioned. You can get the requests, you can get availability tests. So for example, I've got an availability test that's just running on this to make sure my infrastructure is fine. You get that, whatever input that comes from, performance testing, any dependency checks, any custom events that you decide to put into it because you want to check any level of dependency, any level of packages, whatever it is that you want to test from that performance, availability, failure perspective. And that becomes quite a powerful one because, again, in the same way we've just created that item, integrated into CI, looked at what release was linked to what event, you can do the exact same across the board, no matter what type of request or event you're looking at. Now, one of the features that you're probably going to find a lot more useful than some of what we've looked at, although this is already starting to be quite a powerful event from App Insights. And again, I haven't configured anything specifically here. This is all kind of out of the box. But the next thing I want to show you is this application map. And the application map is brilliant for complex systems, which, let's face it, this is not the most complex system, but it at least gives you a bit of an insight in terms of understanding what my website is calling, when, how, where, what's been going on, what's been the performance statistics. So I'm just trying to reload that staging, and I am just going to go back on my pipeline so that we can go to that next stage, so we can start seeing those error messages trickle in that little bit faster. So it might take a little bit of time, because right now it looks like it's a perfectly healthy instance. Normally, had it not been a live demo, we would have gotten this information a little bit more kind of accurately. But what I can do, as I mentioned, is look at the different calls. So right now, very simply put, is communicating to the Azure Monitor profiler, and it's communicating back into my instance of App Insights, again, because it's a very, very, very simple application. But your application map is going to be multi-component. It's going to have potentially front tier, mid-tier, back-end as well. Back-end might not be as simple and straightforward as you would think here in a SQL database. It could be whatever you want, and that gets mapped here. So you can very quickly have a look at, hey, what sort of calls am I making? What's the response time I'm looking at? And if I'm looking at specific calls or specific interfaces, I can look at the exact call that's happening, the duration, and if there's something around performance that seems a bit off, i.e., something seems a bit slow to respond, I can put in some alerting, some notifications, some automation that then allow me to go in the same way we investigated that failure, investigate specific performance events that don't meet that usual performance curve that you want. And it might be something around the lines of actually server's not attainable, it's being saturated, it can be a lot of things, and those tend to give you those error messages and that information in a lot more comprehensive way. Another element is at the core instance, I can choose to look at exactly what's going on in terms of what are the top failings, what are the top requests, what are essentially all of the key features. And right now I'm focusing on the application side, and it kind of does all in one. If I had a separate compute side that I wanted to link in, I could also tie that back into the same app instance and get that little bit of extra granularity in terms of what we're looking at. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is great, but realistically, this hasn't brought us anywhere closer. But if I wanted to look back on the grand scheme of things as to what might have changed in the last month or since last Thursday or since that instance, if I put up the data for the last 30 days, you'll notice now that all of a sudden, oh wait, there is a SQL database. It is communicating. There are calls going to it. And so in that sense, I'm starting to think, hold on a second, why is it no longer appearing? And that already, from that pure application mapping and just that kind of topology, gives you that insight to say, actually, maybe that connection's not what I thought it was. Maybe there's something going wrong there. Again, we're in the know, but the people, or typically when you be debugging, think about a complex application. This map becomes very, very powerful very quick because you can very quickly see exactly what's communicating with what and when. If that's not enough as well, and you want to get a better understanding of actually, I want to set up some custom alerts. I want to set up a little bit of that extra bit of automation, an extra check, tie that back into my CI/CD and have some checks run to make sure that I've got sort of REST APIs calling the right thing, etc. And I want to get the right metrics to run those alerts again, those notifications again. A quick way to check what metrics are available to you is through the live metrics console. And that, again, becomes quite powerful, especially when you're mid-troubleshooting or you're kind of wanting to understand exactly some of the behavior live. You've got this very quick dashboard that gives you not only telemetry from failed requests, exemptions, performance deteriorations, etc., out of the box, but you also get that kind of live measurement of, okay, here are my key metrics, how they relate to each other, and I can very quickly see, oh, okay, so my request failure rate is going to be somewhere along the 1 per second. If it's starting to error out, I might want to set up an alert that says if that starts getting hit, send something to my admin team or create that ticket through the automation that I just showed you that we did manually here, that create work item, or kind of create a bug item or create something that raises that flag so that the developers know that something's gone wrong. Because you're not always going to be checking these live, right? You're going to be likely working on your developer and then you're going to get the complaints coming in and you'd want to catch that as early as possible rather than later. And so that's typically one of the really nice elements of the dashboard. And the view that we had from a transactional perspective, you get the exact same view at the bottom. And if you're starting to think, hey, this is getting a bit much, you can just pause it, reset it, review it, and actually get some queries running if you want to integrate that with your log analytics, get some of that more detailed logging and kind of review. So for now, we kind of have a very, very good understanding or very good guess that something's gone wrong from a database. It's disappeared from our application mapping. We kind of already know based on the type of error it is that it's going to be linked to that. But I want to just showcase 1 or 2 extra tools that are within the app service suite directly. So a little bit separate from App Insights that you can use in conjunction with this to really get to the bottom of some of your issues. You'll notice this is now still running, hence why we're getting the request, and that was the initial intent. But what I'm now going to do is I'm going to take a step back, and I'm just going to go back into my, my actual staging instance. And what I want to get is actual live logging of what is going wrong. And from a pure kind of logging perspective, get the raw data of what is happening underneath the hood. So I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to go into log stream. That log stream, and depending on whether it's enabled, you can write it to the file system, which means that it gets disconnected. In my case, I did it earlier. So you'll notice it's still running. But typically, otherwise, you can send it to a blob storage account. You can do whatever you want with it, but it's just purely logs streaming to it. And I'm thinking this is too much noise. So I'm just going to pause it, take a second, try and figure out what exactly is going wrong. I've got my 404 error, which is the one for the API, which I don't care that much for. And I've got my internal 500 error. And again, not a great UI, but you can copy it, send it to whatever. You can stream this with a bit of automation. So if you're using even third-party tools, if you're not using purely App Insights. But the beauty of it, for example, Grafana, whatever it is, you can really stream that information and get the live stream of the logs. And the first thing that's going to pop into my mind here is, oh, something's gone wrong with the web config file. Surprise, surprise, that's where the connection string is going to be announced, right? And I might want to say, hey, so I'm going to go and check out my web config file. But what good is that going to do me if I go back in my IDE or my local builds that's actually not necessarily been produced, not being live, not actually out there, so as to speak? I might want to go and see what exactly has been deployed to this particular instance that's been failing. And that's where advanced tools allows you to use what essentially Kudu, which is kind of an open source tool that we use at Microsoft, that allows you to do live debugging within the actual environment and gives you that ability to navigate the actual console, if you will, behind the scenes of your app service or your container instance or your function app, whatever it is. In my case, I'm just going to navigate into the root, and I want to edit the live web config file to see what has been passed in, what's been put in there, what am I getting. And if I look all the way down, I've got, my connection string and something that says, it's going to be injected, that is going to be injected during the deploy pipeline. This means one of two things, right? Either it was supposed to be injected and something went terribly wrong, or it's being overridden by the actual configuration at the app service level, which is, again, where we deleted it. And so you might think, okay, so it's one of these two things, right? It's either my pipeline's messed up, but it doesn't look like I introduced any breaking changes. My pipeline ran fine. My builds were all right. Not really getting that. I want to just check to make sure. And if you get the same message from the functioning instance, because again, we're using that deployment slot so that any breaking changes won't actually break your main production website, I can go and do the exact same test, i.e. go in those advanced tools within the core instance of this kind of .NET application, exactly the same as I did before. Go into it. It'll take a bit of time, it's a bit repetitive, but essentially what this is going to allow me to do is compare. If I get a fully formed connection string, well, first of all, I might need to check from a security perspective whether or not that's a great thing. But also, I'm probably going to be thinking, actually, the error is at the configuration level of the application. Because if that's is at the pipeline level, because otherwise I should also be getting a fully formed connection string inside of my staging, right? This should be a fully formed string. If it's that same placeholder, that means that I'm overriding it at the application configuration level, which then gives me that ability to very quickly do that comparison, scroll down and see, this is also a placeholder, which means it doesn't actually get passed in during my pipeline, which means that somewhere within my configuration of my app service, this has gone wrong. And lo and behold, we actually just broke it. And if we were to re-add it to the configuration, now we would know that this is the error. Again, typically when it's something like that, like a connection string's broken, you would know this beforehand. You would get a good idea that the data is not loading. You would actually be able to quickly, and that would be one of your first checks, what about my configuration? Because I know I put it there. So I'm not saying this is necessarily the most real-life world example, but hopefully you're realizing that just with App Insights and some of the built-in tools, and at no point did I go into any code editor, at no point did I have to go back through my releases or anything like that. I've got a very clear picture of exactly what it is that might be going wrong, what some of the performance issues might have been with my instance, and actually I can very quickly go back and change that. And think about it from this perspective. At the moment, this is a very simple kind of mid and frontier combined plus backend. The more complex you get, the more that telemetry is going to tell you a lot of information about those different components and what's going wrong and what's happening during the calls, what performance deterioration, etc. And the more you scale, the more powerful App Insights becomes. So that's kind of it. Hopefully this is useful. And any questions, feel free to ask. Do you want me to switch off my mic for the Q&A?
Yes, please. We'll use this one. If you have an answer, then switch it back on, just because otherwise we get some interference. But thank you. That was a really awesome talk. Thank you, and a great demo. So yeah, right straight, one hand at the back. Right then.
What if your app fails on the app start, would you get still logs?
Ooh, that's a great question. So typically, if it fails on the app start, well, you're going to get that information on the pipeline quite quickly, i.e. your tests aren't going to run, your functional tests aren't going to succeed. But moving past that, your live metrics are just going to show empty, right? And that in itself is going to be like, oh, hold on a second. So what happened? And from there, you see that event at t=0. That event is going to be picked up as a transaction, as a failure, as a performance deterioration, as an availability problem, whatever it is that that metric shows. If I go back into the, sorry. Oh, no, I do not want to not save that. I do want my connection string back. Sorry about that. But that will show, sorry, we'll get there. That will show within your transaction logs here. So you can do a transaction search and you'll see at that failure, that one event was a failure, and you'll get that information and that kind of background on it. Likewise, if you've enabled log streaming to your storage account or even to the file system, you'll get that startup log breakdown that gives you that. But you're right, like this is a lot more for that continuous monitoring, but it still gives you that information as a unique event. That's a really good question.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions in the room? We do. We have a couple. We'll come to you first.
How customizable are the metrics? Like, do they support dimensions or anything like that?
Really good question. So first of all, within App Insights, what you decide to stream as metrics, actually, let me show you that. You can choose, depending on the language framework that you're using, to have that configuration more or less complex, more or less complete. So for example, here, very simple, I'm using .NET. I've got different frameworks, for example, Node.js, Java, Python, that might give you different levels of collections and log type metrics to be able to capture from. Right now, I've enabled all of them. You can select, because sometimes, and actually this is not directly related, but cost becomes a big issue when you're talking log analytics, when you're talking about what you're streaming. So you might be wanting to pick up on specific types of events that you know are common failures within the world or within the framework that you're working with. This is where you can start doing that. And another place, sorry, I don't have my ID up, so I'll just go through the repo, is you can specify within the App Insights config file, if that's the way you're deploying it, exactly what level of telemetry you want from that metric. And then going to your question, how deep and how complex can you make those metrics? That will be more determined by our product groups and our backend in terms of what metrics are available to you for that specific type of service. And if I'm ever in doubt about it, all of the actual services have that metrics side. So on top of the live metrics, on top of the App Insights, you can go in here and figure out exactly which of the metrics, which tend to be multi-dimensional a lot of times, and you can do some good, some nice complex things with that. And you've got the raw logs anyway coming into your log analytics system. If really that querying is enough, you can stream it through to another system, or you can run some queries locally on that. So it's not, let's say that all the logs that you're going to be looking for in metrics are there, but most of the time in all the customers I've worked with, they've never been short of metrics. If anything, on the contrary, they're getting a bit too much information that it gets a bit too noisy, so to speak. Yeah, really good question.
Awesome, thank you. I think we've got one more.
Yes, you say 2 times already, like the log stream can be put into the blob storage.
Yeah.
How exactly?
Yeah, very good point. So if I go into my deployment here, you'll notice just above the log stream, I can configure my app service logs. And inside of this, I can choose whether or not I want to store it to a specific blob, where that retention goes. And what it'll do is it'll create a blob. If I wanted to do that on I've already got an existing storage account, existing blob, you would do that via command line. But yeah, so fairly straightforward in terms of how you integrate it. And again, you get the selection of which logs you want to capture and at what level of error you want to be actually getting that information. So you don't overwhelm your system and you're not overpaying for some of the logs that might be less relevant.
Okay, brilliant. I do have one question that I really want to quickly ask. You mentioned that you can stream these logs to third-party places, right?
Yeah.
So this is all very Microsoft-based.
Yeah.
Where can you send this to? Like, what other third-party applications can you send these logs to?
Anything, really, because at the end of the day, you're interacting with the App Insights through basically your metrics being collected as raw logs that can be either processed within Log Analytics and then straight forward to your Splunk instance, your Grafana, whatever it is that you want to use afterwards. And the way you would typically stream that, we've got some documentation on most of the integrations out there. We would typically stream that using something like a services hub or something like that, where you would just send through that connection straight away. If you wanted the raw logs to be there, what we would technically recommend from a best practice perspective to avoid kind of cross-charging you is instead of sending it both to Log Analytics and to your kind of third-party preferred tool, send it to Log Analytics, do that initial bit of processing that you can, even though it might not be the full criteria they're looking for integrated with what you want, and send the processed logs then afterwards into your actual preferred system.
Wicked, thank you. I think we only have one more. Did you have your hand up? Oh yeah, the same question.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
There you go. Perfect.
There we go.
Plants in the audience.
All right, fantastic. So I think if we can switch over the laptops, we've got a couple of dates that I want to, I'll let them play with it. Oh, look at that, fantastic. So a couple of dates that I want everyone to see. So on the 7th of October, so next Friday, this Friday, we have got the EMEA Student Summit. So if you're a student, I mean, to be fair, you don't really need to be a student to watch it either, but it's mostly tailored to people who are learning. We have the EMEA Student Summit, which is going to be fantastic. That is cross-region, so all the way from the UK, all the way over to Dubai. I'll be hosting that with my colleagues around the world, which is going to be fantastic. On the 12th to 14th, like Adam has already touched on for us, thank you very much. We have got Microsoft Ignite, and yes, we have got the UK Spotlight, which I'll be talking more about what we do in the community, especially what we do here with the Reactor and third-party community groups that present here. And on the 19th of October, I'm kicking off a 4-part series, Learn Go with Liam. So if you've ever wanted to learn a little bit of Golang or learn how to get into some coding, then yes, I will be teaching you the very basics of how you can go manipulate JSON, how you can get started with your hello worlds, all these kind of things, working my way up to a nice workbook that I'll be releasing in the new year of how you can manipulate and work with Microsoft Azure services with Golang, since it's not a language which is, massively been supported, but something that we are really trying to push forward and I'm passionate about. So I'll be teaching the community how to learn some Go. So with that, I'm going to wrap up our meetup this evening. So a massive thank you for all of you who have come, and thank you ever so much for everybody who is listening and watching online. So I'd just like to give a round of applause for our 2 speakers, Tarun, who is unfortunately not here, but was here remotely, and of course, Johan. So thank you very much. It's now time for some networking, so please mingle. We have got some time left. Enjoy.